Donald Trump has now given two companies with a history of bribery and corruption the right to buy Venezuelan oil. He's holding the money from those sales in an offshore Qatari bank account, and he has the final say over whether all those funds are given to the Venezuelan government. Right, that is the plan that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to defend before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yesterday in his first public testimony to Congress since the abduction and arrest of Nicolas Maduro. But where we'll start are with the two companies who have been awarded confidential licenses to buy and sell Venezuelan oil with little independent oversight despite continued sanctions. And their names are Vitoll and Trafigura, and they're actually two of the three largest oil trading firms in the world. Right, and they're getting this deal about 1 year after the Trump administration absolutely gutted the Foreign Corrupt Practices Unit at the Justice Department. And that ends up being notable because that DOJ unit, they brought charges against these two companies and their traders in 2020 and 2024. In fact, Vitol ended up paying $135 million in criminal penalties to settle accusations that it bribed officials in Mexico, Ecuador, and Brazil. And Trah-fig-you're-uh, they ended up forking over fines and forfeitures totaling $126 million as part of a plea deal in which it admitted guilt. And that case specifically involved payments being funneled through shell companies and offshore accounts in order to conceal bribes to Brazilian officials that the DOJ said netted the company over $61 million in profits. So even that, it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. In 2024, for example, Trah-fig-you're-uh agreed to pay another $55 million in civil penalties to U.S. regulators over allegations that it acquired confidential information about gasoline contracts, manipulated prices, and impeded potential whistleblowers. Then a month later, Vitol and another firm coughed up a cool $50 million to deal with a case brought by the California AG involving allegations that they had secretly worked together to tamper with and manipulate gasoline prices in the state. Then another month later, an individual Vitol trader was convicted of bribery, and last year, Trah-fig-you're-uh was convicted on corruption charges in Switzerland for having bribed an Angolan official for oil contracts, although the company is now appealing that. And so then with all that, you have people like Robert Bachman, an analyst at a Swiss NGO investigating commodities traders, saying Trump is taking advantage of firms that know how to circumvent regulation, saying they were previously hunted down by the U.S. Department of Justice, but that does not seem to matter to the current administration. Now that said, there are other reasons to go with these guys, right? You've reportedly had administration and industry officials arguing that their existing networks of tankers and storage facilities across the Caribbean, it makes them an obvious choice. Or with the head of the Latin American Energy Program at Rice University saying they are probably among the few companies that can in short notice allocate such a large number of barrels, 30 million to 40 million, so it's a very convenient way for the administration to solve what would have been a much more complex problem. And with that, the licenses that these companies have been awarded reportedly enable them to buy tens of millions of barrels of oil already in Venezuelan reserves, or that is pumped while sanctions remain in place. And in fact, according to the Washington Post, it may even let them trade other natural resources in Venezuela, such as iron ore and agricultural products, potentially making this even more lucrative than previously believed. Though as far as the oil, you have administration officials stressing that the deal requires the firms to sell at least half to buyers in the US, while they also say that the money going to Venezuela will be used to stabilize the economy and benefit the Venezuelan people. But again, very notably, Donald Trump as an individual gets to decide where the money's dispersed. And in this case, the firms have reportedly already paid $500 million up front, and Venezuela so far confirmed receipt of the first $300 million last week, with the rest maybe still sitting in a Qatari bank. And this appears to be a way of keeping the money away from creditors with pending claims against Venezuela and its state-owned oil company. But also, of course, we're talking about potential corruption. I mean, you hear Qatar and you're like, isn't that the country that gifted Trump a $400 million luxury jet? And that's just one thing among several questionable things. And, with all this, while it's a much smaller amount, it's worth noting that a senior trader at Vitol donated $6 million to political committees supporting Trump's 2024 election. Though there you have the company emphasizing that the donations were made by an individual and not the business. Also, I will say, at least according to one expert, the U.S. taking control of another country's oil sales and routing payments to an offshore account, it's not without precedent, where the U.S. actually managed sales of Iraqi oil using foreign bank accounts in the 2000s, but notably, you had this expert adding, there is also precedent for corruption scandals popping up around these schemes. That's concerning not just because of what we've talked about so far, but, the fact that so much about this, it seems to be shrouded in secrecy, right? And you're seeing things like an economist who is also a member of the Venezuelan opposition saying, the Venezuelans are the owners of the oil and we know nothing. There is no transparency. And saying in a normal condition, a sovereign country sells oil and the exact number of barrels and the price are known and goes to the central bank. But adding, again, right now, we know nothing. And so with all of this, just today, you had California Representative Robert Garcia sending a letter to the CEOs of Vitol and Trafigura asking for answers about any agreements made with the Trump administration in Venezuela. You're also seeing Senator Elizabeth Warren claiming in a statement that the Trump administration is funneling another country's oil revenues into hand-picked accounts with virtually no oversight, and adding, Congress cannot allow Trump to treat Venezuela's oil profits like his personal slush fund. And now Warren, along with 4 other senators, have actually launched an investigation asking for information from 15 major American banks to figure out whether they were approached by the administration before the military action in Venezuela. Or because you've actually had Donald Trump telling reporters straight up that he had spoken with oil executives before and after the military operation. And so yesterday, you had Rubio trying to do some damage control, denying that that had ever actually happened.
That never happened. I couldn't be with him because it never happened. The oil executives were not involved whatsoever in any of the planning on this matter. All of those executives learned about this operation the same time everybody else did.
Well, President Trump has said the opposite in public.
But then, in getting to what's actually happening now, you had Rubio trying to clarify a little bit about what the plan is regarding Venezuelan oil. And so Rubio confirmed that the proceeds from sales are held in an offshore account in Qatar, but he said that eventually they'll be transferred to an account in the United States that the U.S. can block with sanctions if necessary. And then, to get the money in this account, he explained that Venezuela's interim government has agreed to submit a monthly budget request, meaning that it would have to request the use of those funds for a set of very specific purposes that the U.S. would basically need to approve, with him then saying that the U.S. controls the dispersal of the money, but not the actual money. Right, and at least according to Rubio, the Venezuelan government has pledged to use a substantial amount of those funds to purchase medicine and equipment directly from the United States. But then among those who were criticizing this, you had Democratic Senator Brian Schatz, who questioned whether the Trump administration had the legal authority to create and manage such an account. Also, you had him complaining that the administration hadn't released the text of what Rubio said was the written agreement with the Venezuelan government. And then outside the hearing, you had Texas Representative Lloyd Doggett saying in a statement that Rubio's testimony raised more questions than answers, saying he wanted to know why, for example, the administration had chosen Qatar and not a country with much stronger banking laws and a history of robust management of oil revenues. He also said that by shielding the money from creditors through the use of the Qatari account, the Trump administration is unlawfully refusing to honor debts owed to U.S. institutions, which is also kind of notable because part of Trump's so-called justification for taking Venezuela's oil was that it was stolen from American companies. A claim that, we've talked about before is misleading at best, but, with all that, the pushback, it didn't just come from Democrats. You also had Rand Paul, for example, going after Rubio for the attack and arrest of Maduro, rejecting Rubio's repeated characterization of American military action as a law enforcement operation.
If a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I think we're in violation of both the spirit and the law of the Constitution by bombing a capital, blockading a country, and removing elected officials. And we certainly wouldn't tolerate it, nor would I if someone did it to us.
Now with that, you had Rubio denying that they had removed an elected official, saying that Maduro was illegitimate, right? Because Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader who was barred from running, the person that was seen as her stand-in, was widely believed to be the real winner of the last election. She's also been in the States pleading her case to Trump, asking Trump to help her get back to Venezuela as soon as possible, giving the man her Nobel Peace Prize. And actually, she met with Rubio after the hearing yesterday, and she said, "We are willing to facilitate a genuine transition, but not a Russian-style transition where mafias remain in control," saying Venezuela does not need stability from criminals, it needs justice, truth, and freedom. With that, while Rubio said that the end goal is free and fair democratic elections, he didn't give a timeline. Plus, I'll say at least for now, it seems like Machado returning to Venezuela could disrupt the White House's plans there. All while, at least for Trump, it's very clear that this whole thing is about oil and not democracy. And if you needed more proof, while Maduro is facing charges, including narco-terrorism, questions remain about what kind of ties his old ally who replaced him, Delcy Rodriguez, has to trafficking networks. You've got the Associated Press reporting recently that she's been on the DEA's radar for years for suspected involvement in drug and gold smuggling, though no public criminal charges have ever been filed. You have Rubio saying that the administration had established a very respectful and productive line of communication with Rodriguez and saying, "It's our belief that her own self-interest aligns with advancing our key objectives." Rubio also justified the regime change mission that's not a regime change mission, saying it's a strategic necessity because Venezuela under Maduro had been a base of operation for virtually every competitor, adversary, an enemy in the world, or with him giving Venezuela's alleged ties to Iran, Russia, and China as examples. But notably, Rodriguez hasn't met the White House's demand to cut ties with those countries. So that's why you had Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen saying,
"All the same people are running the country. Maduro's vice president, now the interim president, has taken no steps to diminish Iran, China, or Russia's considerable influence in Venezuela. One of the reasons that has been given for the mission. Her cooperation appears tactical and temporary and not a real shift in Venezuela's alignment."
And with that, U.S. intelligence reports have apparently raised doubts about whether Rodriguez fully is on board with American strategy in her country. And in fact, over the weekend, you had her saying she has had enough of Washington's orders. So all of that, it brings up the question, if she doesn't end up being compliant, what's the Trump administration going to do about it? Then responding to a question from Senator Chris Murphy, Rubio made it clear that they are not ruling out the possibility of military action in Venezuela again.
The president never ruled out his options as commander-in-chief to protect the national interest of the United States. I can tell you right now with full certainty, we are not postured to, nor do we intend or expect to have to take any military action in Venezuela at any time. The only military presence you'll see in Venezuela is our Marine Guards at an embassy. Okay, that is our goal, that is our expectation, and that is what everything that outlines towards.
But if you-
That said, if an Iranian drone factory pops up and threatens our forces in the region, the president retains the option to eliminate that threat.
And then with that, you had Murphy asking if the Trump administration would get authorization from Congress this time if it took military action in Venezuela. So there you had Rubio responding by claiming that under federal law, any military action lasting longer than 60 days would require congressional authorization, basically leaving the door open for another operation of the sort we've already seen.